So here's the thing about humans that the Xylothian Council never put in their official reports, right? We're weird. Like, genuinely, phenomenally weird in ways that make the so-called apex predators of the galaxy look like they're playing checkers while the universe is playing four-dimensional chess. Let me back up. My name is Keeper Vex, and I'm what you might call a xenobiologist, or as I prefer to say in mixed company. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. A professional watcher of things that could absolutely devour me if they felt like it. I've been observing the human named Marcus for approximately 6 months now, and I'm pretty sure my lab reports are starting to sound less like scientific documentation and more like the confused rambling of someone who's had way too many stimulant drinks. It started when Marcus was deployed to Station Meridian as part of the joint trade agreement between Earth and the Xylothian Collective. Humans were supposed to be simple enough to understand. They had thumbs, basic technology, and an almost laughable lack of natural weapons. Sure, they were bipedal and kind of awkward-looking by galactic standards, but nobody expected them to do anything particularly interesting. They certainly weren't supposed to cause approximately 47 diplomatic incidents in their first month, most of which involved them adopting things. Yes, adopting things. The first incident involved a collection of orphaned Vexian hatchlings who had somehow managed to get separated from their brood. Vexians are not cute. I want to establish that right now. They're about the size of a house cat, but they have approximately 7 times more teeth per square inch than any creature naturally should. Claws that could pierce titanium plating, and a venom that could dissolve organic matter in approximately 45 seconds. They're also terrified of literally everything when they're young. Which means the orphaned ones were essentially trembling, murderous potatoes with attitude problems. The station authorities decided to euthanize them. Perfectly logical decision, right? Can't have apex predators running around the station eating people's faces off. Standard protocol. Marcus heard about this during lunch. And I say during lunch, because apparently that's when humans make their most important decisions, usually while holding something that drips on their clothing. He just stood up, abandoned his meal, and walked directly to the containment facility. Nobody tried to stop him, which in retrospect was probably a mistake, because humans have this weird thing where they just do stuff and people kind of go along with it out of sheer confusion. What he found was what I can only describe in my professional report as, quote, a potentially hazardous situation handled with unprecedented results. But what actually happened was Marcus walked into a room with 7 screaming baby Vexians and didn't flinch. According to witness testimony, which I've transcribed approximately 7 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, Marcus sat down in the middle of the floor, made himself smaller than the predators, and just existed there. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't defensive. He was just a weird-looking alien sitting in the floor like he decided that this was the best spot to spend his afternoon. The hatchlings stopped screaming. Then they did something I've never seen documented. They approached him, not to attack, not to investigate as potential prey. They approached him like he was a source of warmth or comfort or something equally baffling. One of them actually climbed into his lap. Marcus just started petting it. Petting it, like it was some kind of earth creature designed for companionship instead of, murdering things. The next 3 hours involved Marcus on the floor with 7 increasingly sleepy Vexian hatchlings, while medical personnel stood around debating whether this was courage or stupidity. The consensus was that it was definitely stupidity, but stupidity with results, which is apparently the most human thing possible. When the Vexian mother arrived to retrieve her offspring, everyone thought Marcus was finally going to die. The mother Vexian was the size of 3 humans, possessed the temperament of a territorial storm cloud, and had absolutely no reason to be merciful. She came in hot, ready for violence, ready to reclaim her young before they imprinted on this strange, pale creature. What happened next is documented in my report as the subject engaged in unprecedented interspecies communication. But what actually happened was Marcus looked up, made eye contact with a creature that could liquefy his organs with a single bite, and just said, "Hey, they're safe. They're okay. I was just helping." The mother Vexian stopped. And I mean, stopped. Like someone hit the pause button on her rampage. She looked at her sleeping hatchlings, looked at Marcus, and then, and this is the part that made me need to recalibrate all my instruments, she let out this sound that was part rumble and part something that might have been gratitude. She took her babies back. She didn't hurt Marcus. She didn't even threaten him. She just nodded, and by some miracle of cross-species communication, that nod meant something like respect or thanks or possibly both. After that, Marcus became kind of famous. Not in a bad way, which was shocking. Everyone expected humans to be selfish or aggressive, or at least consistent in some way. But Marcus had decided that the best use of his time on a space station populated by creatures that could kill him in countless creative ways was to help things. It was ridiculous. It was inefficient. It went against every survival protocol in the book. And somehow, it was working. 6 months into his deployment, Marcus had basically become an unofficial caretaker for half the station's struggling fauna. There were Chimerians who showed up at his quarters for companionship. A Krell, collector who'd become depressed, had started attending social events because Marcus invited them. Even the Vrax, a species known for their extreme antisocial behavior, had stopped trying to attack other station residents after Marcus had a long conversation with one about the philosophical nature of violence. The Vrax's name was Kestrel, and I say this with complete sincerity, they became friends. They played games together. They argued about things. It was like watching someone befriend a living contradiction, which, fair enough, might be exactly what a Vrax is. But the weirdest situation, the one that finally made me document this entire absurd timeline, happened on a Tuesday afternoon when I was observing from the observation deck, which is honestly just a fancy way of saying I was hiding and watching people while trying not to get caught. The Thravian hunting cubs had been a problem all week. 3 of them, orphaned from their pack when hunters mistakenly culled their mothers, had taken up residence in the lower maintenance sections of the station. Thravians are predators. I cannot stress this enough. They are apex predators who hunt for sport and survival in equal measure. They have teeth, so many teeth, and muscles, and claws, and this weird thing where they're basically perfect killing machines, except they have an even weirder thing where they're pack animals who feel things. The cubs, all of them approximately 2 years old, which is basically toddler age for Thravians, were stressed, confused, hungry in ways that maintenance supplies couldn't really fix. They kept trying to hunt station residents, which was causing problems because everyone kept trying to execute them, which was also causing problems because apparently nobody wanted to be the species that murdered 3 confused baby predators. The council called a meeting about it. I attended. It was very official and very complicated, and nobody could come to a consensus about what to do with the cubs. The options ranged from sedation to relocation to the unfortunately popular option of execution. Then someone mentioned that Marcus had befriended a Vrax, and everyone looked at each other like maybe, just maybe, This weird human had figured out something that thousands of years of xenodiplomacy hadn't. They asked Marcus to try. I wish I could tell you that I was shocked by his response. But at this point, Marcus doing something ridiculous was basically the guaranteed outcome of any situation. He just nodded, asked where the cubs were, and headed down to maintenance like he was going to grab lunch instead of potentially meeting 3 creatures that could eat him alive. I followed him, because obviously I did. Science demands documentation, and also I was genuinely curious about whether this was finally the situation where Marcus's weird interspecies empathy would fail catastrophically. I wasn't rooting for his failure exactly, but I was definitely prepared to witness it. The maintenance sector was dim, metallic, and basically everything you'd expect from the unglamorous underbelly of a space station. Marcus moved through it with purpose, but not aggression, which is apparently the key to not getting murdered by predators. He made noise as he walked, announced himself verbally, which seems like a terrible idea in retrospect, but somehow worked. We found the cubs in a corner near the water filtration system. They were huddled together, scared, and when they spotted Marcus, they did exactly what scared apex predators do. They hissed and snapped and made themselves look bigger, which for Thravians just meant all their fur stood on end, and they looked like angry, fuzzy rectangles with too many teeth. Marcus stopped walking. He sat down. Right there in the corridor, he sat down and made himself smaller than them. It's wild how consistent his approach is, honestly. I should note that in my report. Consistency is underrated in human psychology. The cubs didn't immediately attack, which I think was surprising to everyone, including Marcus. They circled him, sniffing, investigating this strange creature who wasn't acting like prey or threat. Marcus kept talking, this constant low murmur of words that probably didn't mean anything to them, but conveyed a kind of calm that was contagious. After about 15 minutes of this, which felt like either hours or seconds depending on how much adrenaline your body was producing, one of the cubs did something unexpected. It laid down. Just flopped onto the ground, exhausted from fear and hunger and the general stress of being an orphaned apex predator on a space station. The other 2 quickly followed suit. Marcus didn't try to pet them or restrain them or do anything particularly invasive. He just sat there while they slept. And he looked, if I'm being entirely honest in this report, genuinely content. That's the thing nobody really talks about when they discuss humans. They're not just weird. They're happy in their weirdness. They seem to enjoy it. They seem to find purpose in something that would exhaust any other species. After about an hour, Marcus carefully stood up. The cubs didn't wake. He looked at me with this expression that might have been smug or might have been exhausted, hard to tell with humans, and just said, "They're going to need food. Regular food, not station rations. And they need space to run, and something soft to sleep on." I blinked at him. "You're not going to recommend execution?" "Why would I do that? They're kids. They're scared. They just need help." This is the part of the report where my scientific objectivity starts to crack. Because what Marcus was describing wasn't complicated alien psychology. It was basic care. The same thing you'd do for any young creature, predator or otherwise. Over the next few days, the station worked with Marcus to create a temporary enclosure for the Thravian cubs. Not a cage. He was very specific that it shouldn't feel like a cage, more like a habitat. They brought in enrichment items, real food that the cubs' digestive systems could process, and toys, which feels weird to write officially, but the cubs did seem to enjoy them. Marcus started spending time with them every day. Not forced interaction, just presence. He'd sit with them while they ate. He'd watch them play. He'd clean up after them, which is genuinely one of the most human things I've ever documented, because he didn't complain about it once. The cubs improved. Their stress levels dropped. Their social behavior became more normal. Within 2 weeks, they were playing with each other like actual cubs instead of traumatized predators. Within a month, a Thravian pack from a neighboring system agreed to take them in. When Marcus helped load them into the transport, I swear I saw him getting emotional about it, like he was saying goodbye to friends. The cubs pressed their faces against the transport window as it left, and Marcus just waved until they were out of sight. That should have been the end of it. Marcus should have been done with his weird humanitarian mission, ready to move on to actual work duties. But apparently humans don't work that way. Apparently once they start caring about things, they just don't stop. Which brings me to last Tuesday, the day I documented for this report, the day everything kind of came together in a way that made the entire situation crystal clear. I was doing standard observation work when I noticed something odd in the sector near the rec room. The Thravian hunting cubs, the ones that had been picked up by the other pack, the ones that were supposed to be light years away by now, had somehow ended up back on the station. This was problematic for approximately 7 reasons, the primary one being that they were back, and they were with a juvenile Glaxian who'd been recently admitted to the station with an infection that required specialized treatment. Glaxians are not predators. They're herbivores, gentle creatures who are basically the galaxy's therapy animals. The fact that these 2 species were in the same room seemed like a setup for catastrophe. But when I checked on them, they were just existing together. The Thravian cubs were curled up under a table in the common area, sleeping soundly, and the young Glaxian was resting nearby, also asleep. And then Marcus appeared with a blanket. I watched from the observation point as he so carefully that it looked like he was handling something made of glass, draped a soft thermal blanket over the sleeping cubs. Not roughly, not efficiently. He arranged it just right, making sure they were completely covered, but not so much that they'd get too hot. He adjusted it twice because apparently the first attempt wasn't satisfactory. Then he noticed the Glaxian was shivering slightly from the medical treatment's side effects, and he grabbed another blanket and arranged that one too. He stepped back to look at his work like he was an artist, and these were his masterpieces, instead of just animals who happened to be resting in a room. And that's when I finally understood what everyone had been sensing all along. This wasn't just weird human behavior. This was something more fundamental. This was the human thing. This was what humans did. This was their whole deal. While every other species in the galaxy had spent millennia perfecting warfare, diplomacy, trade, and philosophy, humans had perfected this one strange thing. They could see something that was struggling and just decide to help, not for advantage, not for gain, just because it needed helping. It was inefficient. It was occasionally dangerous. It violated approximately 17 protocols about appropriate station conduct. But it worked. Somehow, impossibly, it worked. I documented the blanket incident in full. I included photographs. I added commentary about the careful nature of the arrangement. I noted Marcus's apparent emotional satisfaction at ensuring the creature's comfort. And then I submitted the report to the council with a recommendation. My recommendation was that humans be officially recognized as having a unique capacity for what I termed practical empathy, with the understanding that this trait could be weaponized, or more likely, could fundamentally improve how we approach crisis situations across the galaxy. The council's response was typically bureaucratic. They formed a committee. They scheduled additional studies. They discussed whether humans should be granted additional responsibilities based on this demonstrated capability. But Marcus didn't wait for the bureaucracy to catch up. He just kept doing what he'd been doing all along, helping things, caring for things, arranging blankets over sleeping predators like it was the most natural thing in the universe. And weirdly, it kind of was. I spent the next month documenting Marcus's interactions more carefully. Every rescued creature, every moment of patience, every time he chose compassion over self-preservation. The data was clear. Humans weren't just good at this. They seemed to need it, like it was as important to them as breathing. There was this day, about 3 weeks later, when Marcus spent 14 hours helping an injured Vrax rebuild its shelter. The Vrax had been attacked by larger members of its species, a territorial dispute that left it wounded and vulnerable. Marcus showed up, assessed the situation with the practicality of someone who probably dealt with exactly this kind of problem thousands of times, and just started working. He didn't have specialized tools. He didn't have formal training in Vrax shelter construction, but he had problem-solving skills and patience, and this weird ability to understand what needed to happen and then make it happen. The Vrax kept pushing him away, kept insisting he could handle it, kept being generally difficult because Vrax are kind of built to be difficult. And Marcus just kept working anyway, not aggressively, just persistently, until finally the Vrax just kind of accepted the help. When it was done, the Vrax didn't thank him in words, but it did this weird thing where it leaned its head against Marcus's shoulder, which I've since learned is approximately the highest form of Vrax gratitude. It's what they do when they respect someone, when they trust someone. Marcus just rubbed its neck and said something like, "You're going to be okay. Just need some time. You're tougher than you think." The Vrax made this sound like it was arguing, but there was less venom in it. Progress. By the end of my observation period, I documented Marcus engaging in 47 separate humanitarian interventions. 47. That's almost one per day for the entire deployment period. And the success rate was approaching 93%. Only 4 of the situations ended without positive outcomes, and even those 4 resulted in improved understanding or prevented violence in some form. The station started changing. Creatures that would normally keep to themselves started interacting more. The general violence level dropped. Even the normally antisocial species started appearing in common areas. There was this sense of, and I'm being entirely anecdotal here, but there was this sense of possibility. Like maybe coexistence could work if everyone just tried a little harder. I submitted my final report to the council with all the data compiled and analyzed. I included every blanket incident, every time Marcus had sat with a scared creature, every moment of his stubborn, persistent empathy. The council's response was to approve an expansion of the Human Cultural Exchange Program. More humans were to be deployed to various stations. The recommendation was that they be given flexible duties and allowed to develop their own approaches to integration and community building, which basically meant they were approving Marcus's entire approach without having the bureaucratic flexibility to just say so directly. When I informed Marcus of this decision, he just shrugged and asked if he could stay at Station Meridian for another deployment cycle. Apparently, he'd grown attached to the place, the creatures, the whole situation. I asked him why he cared so much, why he kept putting himself in situations that could hurt him, why helping was apparently more important than safety or advancement or any of the logical motivations that drive most galactic species. Marcus thought about it for a while, which is very human. He thought instead of immediately responding, which somehow makes everything he said more important. Finally, he said, "Because they matter. Because nothing's going to change unless someone decides it's worth changing. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just show up and care when nobody's expecting you to. I included that quote in my final report, verbatim, without trying to interpret it or contextualize it or make it fit into any scientific framework. Sometimes data is data. Sometimes weirdness is just humanity in its purest form. On my last day observing Marcus at Station Meridian, I watched him in the common area with the Thravian cubs and the Glaxian and the Vrax that he'd helped, all of them arranged in a loose circle, while Marcus told them some story about his home planet. They couldn't all understand his words. The languages were incompatible. But they understood the tone. They understood the presence. They understood that he was there, that he cared, that they mattered enough for him to take time out of his day. He looked up and caught me watching. Instead of being concerned or embarrassed, he just smiled and waved me over. I actually came down from the observation deck, which violated approximately 7 protocols, and joined the circle. Marcus made room for me without comment. He didn't treat me like I was a scientist studying him. He treated me like I was someone who'd chosen to sit down, which meant I was someone worth including. And that's when I finally understood the full scope of what humans were bringing to the galaxy. It wasn't technology or weapons or diplomatic skill. It was this fundamental capacity to see another being, regardless of species or appearance or potential threat level, and just decide that they mattered, that their well-being was worth effort, that connection was worth risk. Marcus continued telling his story, and I sat there listening to a human talk to a collection of apex predators and traumatized creatures and one confused xenobiologist. And I thought, yeah, okay, this makes sense. This is humanity. This is why they're going to change everything. When the story ended, one of the Thravian cubs fell asleep against my leg, which felt weird, being used as a pillow by a creature that could theoretically eat me. But I understood now why Marcus never seemed bothered by these situations. It wasn't stupidity or fearlessness. It was just acceptance. Just this basic, fundamental acceptance that connection was worth whatever risk it carried. I let the cubs sleep. I didn't move. I just sat there with all of them in the quiet of the common area while the station hummed around us, and I updated my report one final time. Final observation. Humans are not efficient. They are not logical. They do not maximize survival or advancement in the ways that standard galactic species prioritize. But they possess something that might be more valuable than any of those things. They possess the capacity to look at the broken things in the universe and decide to fix them anyway. They possess stubborn, impractical, absolutely undeniable empathy. And if we're smart, if we're very smart, we'll learn from them before we screw it up. Marcus looked at me and nodded like he knew exactly what I was thinking. Which is probably another thing I should include in future analysis of human capabilities. They seem to have uncanny people-reading abilities, probably related to the empathy thing. I guess the universe needed someone who was just going to care. Turns out that someone is human. The blanket stayed over the Thravian cubs all night. Marcus checked on them 3 times, and when the morning came, he arranged it again, just slightly, just to make sure it was perfect. That's the human thing. That's what I'll remember from Station Meridian. That's what changes everything.